Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. It was a bright Saturday morning when Eleanor stepped onto the polished wooden floor of the elite shooting range. The sun cast long shadows through the high windows, illuminating rows of targets set up with precise care. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of polished metal and leather. Eleanor was not like the usual crowd here. This was a place where seasoned marksmen, military veterans, and high society hobbyists mingled, each confident in their skill and surrounded by the subtle aura of privilege. Their expensive gear gleamed under the lights, and their conversation was peppered with jargon that Eleanor barely understood. She clutched the rental pistol tightly in her hand, feeling the weight of the metal. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from nerves. She had always been quiet, unassuming, a woman who preferred to stay in the background, unnoticed. Life had taught her to avoid drawing attention. Her clothes were simple and worn, far from the tailored jackets and branded gloves sported by the others. She wore a faded denim jacket, frayed at the sleeves, and a plain scarf loosely wrapped around her neck. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame a face marked by a quiet resilience. As she stepped up to the firing line, a few heads turned. Some exchanged amused glances, whispering behind hands. Eleanor caught a few smirks aimed her way. She knew what they were thinking. Who was this simple woman in their refined world? What was she doing here? "Hey, miss," a voice called out from behind her. It was Greg, a tall man with a cocky smile and a high-end rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "You lost or something? This place isn't for beginners." Eleanor didn't respond. She merely nodded and took her place at the station. She had no desire to engage in their mockery. Greg laughed and leaned closer to one of the other shooters. "She looks homeless or something. Bet she can't even hit the target." The words stung, but Eleanor swallowed her pride. She had faced worse judgments in life, being underestimated, dismissed, ignored. This was just another challenge. Her eyes settled on the target, a small circle a few meters away, waiting silently. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. This was her moment. She raised the pistol, fingers steady now. The first shot rang out, echoing sharply in the quiet room. The bullet hit the paper just outside the bullseye. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Greg smirked, shaking his head. "See? Just like I said." But Eleanor didn't waver. She adjusted her stance, took another breath, and fired again. This time the bullet landed closer to the center. The third shot was even better. A perfect bullseye. A hush fell over the room. Whispers turned into surprised glances. Greg's smirk faltered. Eleanor continued, each shot ringing truer than the last. One by one, she hit the bullseye again and again, 10 times in a row. No one spoke. The laughter and ridicule faded into stunned silence. When the last bullet struck the center, Eleanor lowered her pistol. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Greg finally broke the silence. How did you do that?" Eleanor looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet strength. "You don't have to believe me," she said softly, "but never underestimate someone who's been through more than you can imagine." That day marked the beginning of a story no one in that shooting range would forget. But it was just the start. The room was thick with silence after Eleanor's final shot, a silence so complete it seemed to press against every ear like a heavy weight. The usual chatter, the clinking of shells, even the hum of the ventilation system, all had vanished. For the first time, the elite shooting range had become a place where no one dared to speak. Greg's face betrayed something unfamiliar, disbelief edged with embarrassment. The cocky bravado he had worn like armor had crumbled in moments. Slowly, his smirk dissolved into a tight line. Eleanor felt no triumph. Instead, a strange calm settled over her, as though she had passed some invisible test. She gathered her belongings, her movements measured and deliberate, then turned toward the exit. But before she could step away, a sharp voice cut through the tension. Wait. It was Michael, the range's manager, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for fairness. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Who are you?" he asked simply, but with genuine curiosity. Eleanor paused. The question was more complicated than it seemed. "I'm Eleanor," she said softly. Michael nodded slowly. "Eleanor, you have skill, real skill. Have you trained before?" She shook her head. "No training," several people whispered, exchanging glances. "So you're just natural?" Eleanor gave a faint smile. "I learned in my own way." Michael's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, how?" For a moment, Eleanor hesitated. The story she carried was heavy. Too heavy for strangers. But something about this place, the sudden shift in atmosphere, made her want to share a fragment of her truth. She took a breath and began. Eleanor's story unfolds. It started years ago, long before I ever thought about coming here. I grew up in a small town, quiet and forgotten by most maps. My father was a hunter, not the kind who hunted for sport, but for survival. We lived off the land. She paused, memories flickering in her mind like distant shadows. My father taught me how to hold a rifle before I could even ride a bike, not because he wanted me to be a marksman, but because he wanted me to protect myself. The world outside. Our town wasn't kind. Greg scoffed audibly from behind, but Michael raised a hand to silence him. Eleanor continued, voice steady now. When I was a teenager, everything changed. My father disappeared during a hunting trip. No one knew what happened. We searched for days, but the forest gave no answers. The room grew heavy with the weight of her words. After that, I had to learn quickly, alone. I practiced every day, honing my aim, trusting my instincts. It wasn't about competition. It was about survival. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That's why you're so precise. You shoot not to impress, but to protect. Eleanor gave a small smile. Exactly. The crowd reacts, murmurs started spreading among the crowd, some sympathetic, others skeptical. One of the shooters, a woman named Claire, stepped forward hesitantly. Eleanor, if you don't mind me asking, what brought you here today? Eleanor looked around, meeting eyes full of curiosity. I wanted to prove something, to myself more than anyone else. To show that no matter where you come from or what you look like, you can hold your own. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Greg sneered. You think a few lucky shots make you one of us? Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. It's not luck. It's years of hardship you couldn't begin to imagine. A new respect. Michael stepped forward again. Enough. We don't judge by appearance here. If Eleanor wants to train, she's welcome. This place is about skill and respect. The crowd slowly nodded, the atmosphere thawing. A few people approached Eleanor with cautious smiles. Claire offered her a warm handshake. I'd like to learn from you. Eleanor felt something unfamiliar. Hope. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The real story behind her skill, the pain and secrets she carried, were far from over. The unexpected visitor. That evening, as Eleanor left the range and walked toward her modest apartment, she felt eyes watching her. A black car parked across the street caught her attention, but when she glanced again, it was gone. Her heart quickened. The past she thought she had left behind was creeping back. At home, Eleanor sat by the window, memories swirling. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming, but one thing was certain. Her quiet life was about to change forever. The night outside Eleanor's window was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant city sounds. But inside her modest apartment, the quiet felt heavy, as if it were pressing down on her chest. The black car she'd glimpsed earlier lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. Who was watching her? Why now? She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the strange day at the shooting range. For the first time in years, she had felt seen, not as a joke, not as someone to be mocked, but as a person with skill, with worth. But she knew better than to trust appearances. A knock at the door, just as Eleanor was about to turn off the lights and settle in. A sharp knock echoed from the front door. Her heart jumped. Visitors were rare, especially unannounced ones. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole. No one was there. "Hello?" she called softly, opening the door just a crack. Man stepped forward, a tall figure in a dark jacket, his face partially hidden in shadow. He held out a small envelope. "For you," he said quietly, then quickly disappeared down the hallway. Eleanor closed the door and studied the envelope. It was plain, with no return address. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy black-and-white image of a forest clearing. In the center, barely visible, was a figure, a man lying on the ground, motionless. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "Find the truth." Haunted by the past, Eleanor sank into her chair, the photo trembling in her hands. Memories she had long buried rushed back. The disappearance of her father, the endless days spent searching the dense forest, the unbearable silence when he never returned. For years she had told herself to move on, to bury the pain deep inside. But this message, this mysterious photograph, was a reminder that the past was not done with her. Why now? Who wanted her to dig up old wounds? A call from Claire. Just then her phone buzzed. It was Claire, the woman from the shooting range, who had offered to learn from Eleanor. "Eleanor, are you okay? You disappeared after training today." Claire's voice was warm and concerned. Eleanor hesitated but decided to be honest. "Something strange happened. I got a photo in the mail about my father." Claire's voice softened. "If you want, I can come over. You don't have to face this alone." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Thank you. I might take you up on that." Preparing for the journey the next morning, Eleanor packed a small bag. She knew what she had to do. Return to the forest where her father vanished, confront the shadows of her past, and uncover the truth. Claire arrived, her presence a steady comfort. Together, they planned the trip, mapping out the old trails and places Eleanor remembered from her childhood. Despite the fear gnawing at her, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. This journey wasn't just about the past. It was about reclaiming her future. The forest beckons. As they drove toward the remote woods, Eleanor's thoughts raced. She recalled the stories her father told, about dangers lurking beyond sight, about trusting one's instincts, about survival. The shooting range had tested her skills, but this was a different challenge. This was personal, with Claire by her side. Eleanor felt stronger, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The forest was thick with early morning mist, as Eleanor and Claire stepped cautiously over the uneven earth. The trees stood tall like silent sentinels, their leaves whispering secrets carried by the breeze. Eleanor's heart pounded with a strange mixture of fear and determination. This was the place her father had disappeared all those years ago. The place she had avoided but now had to confront. The old clearing. After hours of trekking through the dense undergrowth, they reached a clearing. The sun broke through the canopy in slivers, illuminating patches of moss and fallen leaves. Eleanor's breath caught. "This is it," she whispered. Claire looked around. "Do you recognize anything?" Eleanor's eyes scanned the ground. Among the leaves, something gleamed, a small, rusted locket half buried in the soil. She bent down and carefully picked it up. Opening it, Eleanor saw a faded photo of her father holding a young Eleanor in his arms. Tears welled up in her eyes. "This was his," she said. "I never found this before." The hidden truth as they explored further, Eleanor noticed a shallow depression in the earth, like a grave recently disturbed. The soil was loose, and there were faint footprints leading away from the spot. Her pulse quickened. Suddenly, Claire's voice called out, "Look at this!" Near a cluster of bushes, they found an old, weathered journal. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages yellowed with age. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she opened it. It was her father's journal. Pieces of the past reading through the faded handwriting, Eleanor discovered entries filled with warnings about a secret threat lurking in the forest. Poachers, smugglers, men who would stop at nothing to protect their operations. Her father had been gathering evidence to expose them. The last entry was chilling. "I fear for my life. If anything happens to me, Eleanor must know the truth. Trust no one." A dangerous discovery. Eleanor and Claire realized the danger had not disappeared with time. The black car, the mysterious photo, the message, it was all connected. Suddenly the crack of a branch snapping echoed nearby. They froze. Figures emerged from the shadows, men armed and grim-faced. "You shouldn't be here," one growled, facing fear, but Eleanor's fear had been tempered by years of hardship. She stood tall, her voice steady. "I'm not leaving until the truth is known." Using the skills she had honed over years of survival and practice, Eleanor took control of the situation. She calmly assessed the men's positions, the distance, and her own resources. With precise commands and confident moves, she disarmed the leader's weapon without firing a shot. The others hesitated, then slowly lowered their guns. Justice and closure police arrived moments later, tipped off by Claire, who had called for help. The men were arrested, their illegal operations exposed. Eleanor's father's work had finally seen the light of day. New beginning back at the shooting range weeks later, Eleanor stood among the crowd, no longer the quiet outsider. The same people who had mocked her now looked on with respect. Greg approached, extending a hand. "I was wrong about you." Eleanor smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes more than 10 bullseyes to hit the truth." Final thoughts. Her journey was never just about shooting. It was about courage, resilience, and never giving up on the truth. Eleanor's story became an inspiration, a reminder that strength often hides in the quietest places. The end.